Hello everyone and welcome to the Ticker.com's news channel on YouTube. On this channel, we review stock markets and discuss financial news, market trends, and economic data from Wall Street to Global Street. So let's get started. Stock market indices in the US and around the world notched up new record highs this week as investors warmed up to high growth stocks after the Federal Reserve announced a supersized rate cut last week. Investors cheered a string of better-than-expected economic updates, including the second quarter GDP growth in the U.S. The U.S. economic growth confirmed at 3% in the third and final estimate, suggesting that the economy is on sound footing. The sale of single-family houses in the U.S. in August declined 4.7% from the previous month to a seasonally adjusted annual rate of 716,000. The single-family house sales declined from July's revised rate of 751,000, but is 9.8% higher than the estimated 652,000 in August last year. Despite the rising home prices and elevated mortgage rates, how home sales are still holding up. In Europe, the Swiss National Bank lowered its policy rate by 25 basis points to 1%, a third consecutive decrease in rates, and the cost of borrowing dropped to the lowest level since early 2023. Central Bank noted that policymakers are prepared to lower rates in the coming quarters if necessary, citing weakening inflation outlook. The Swiss National Bank lowered its inflation outlook to 1.2% from 1.3% in 2024, 0.6% from 1.1% in next year, and 0.7% from 1% in 2026. Sweden's Riksbank lowered its benchmark rate by 25 basis points to 3.25% after the policy meeting this week. The Riksbank also signaled additional rate cuts of at least 50 basis points over the next two policy meetings if the outlook for inflation and economic growth remains unchanged. Central Bank lowered the rates by 25 basis points after the policy meeting in May and August. Inflation in Spain and France fell more than expected in September, supporting the case for the European Central Bank to lower its policy landing rate at the next meeting. Consumer price inflation in France slowed to 1.2% in September from 1.8% in August. Consumer price inflation in Spain eased to 1.5% in September from 2.3% in August. Core inflation, which excludes food and energy prices, slowed to 2.4% from 2.7% in the previous month. Stock market indices in mainland China and Hong Kong soared as much as 13% this week after the central bank announced a slew of policy measures to revive economic growth and bolster market sentiment. Among many measures announced by the central bank, the bank also lowered its reserve requirements ratio for commercial banks by 50 basis points to around 6.6% on a weighted average basis and over 9% for large banks in a move that is expected to inject 1 trillion yuan, or about $141 billion liquidity into the banking system. Governor Pan Gongsheng at a press conference also said that the central bank is prepared to lower the reserve ratio requirement by as much as additional 50 basis points before the end of the year if needed. Overall, consumer price inflation in September slowed to 2.2% from 2.6% in August, the Bank of Japan said in a release on Friday. Core inflation, which excludes volatile food prices but not energy prices, slowed to 2% from 2.4%, 4-month acceleration in price increases in Tokyo area. The latest inflation matched the target rate set by the Bank of Japan, driven by a fall in energy prices and slowing food price inflation. Tokyo's inflation is widely considered a harbinger of nationwide price trend, and Japan's inflation data generally follows about 3 weeks later. In other economic news, the U.S. private sector activities expanded in September and durable goods orders were ahead of market expectations. In Europe, Germany's seasonally adjusted jobless rate held steady for the fourth month in a row at 6%, and Spain's wholesale prices declined for the 18th month in a row. In Asia, China's leadership pledged additional fiscal stimulus measures to bolster consumer confidence and arrest the property market decline. Let us review key events in the global bond, currency, and commodity market last week. The yield on the 10-year U.S. Treasury hovered near 3.7% following better than expected economic data supporting the case for additional rate cuts in the year. Crude oil prices in Texas fell to $67 a barrel as the prospect of oversupply dominated market sentiment. Natural gas prices rebounded 8% to 38 euros per megawatt hour amid stable supplies and cooler weather, and gas storage surging to 94% level. The euro hovered at $1.14 after the latest inflation data in Spain and France supported the case for the ECB to lower rates at its next policy meeting. The yen strengthened to 143.50 against the US dollar after the Bank of Japan's meeting of minutes confirmed committee members are not in a hurry to raise rates in the immediate future. We now shift our attention to major stock markets in the US, Europe, and Asia. The S&P 500 index and the Nasdaq Composite advanced for the third week in a row following a string of positive updates on the labor market and the US economy. European markets advanced for the third week in a row as well, tracking gains on Wall Street and rising expectations of a rate cut by the European Central Bank. The Nikkei 225 stock average rebounded 5% and extended weekly gains to the third consecutive week after Tokyo area inflation hovered near the target rate set by the Bank of Japan. Hong Kong indices surged 13% and mainland China indices jumped over 12% after the People's Bank of China announced wide-ranging measures, monetary policy measures to revive economic growth and arrest the decline in the property market. Indian market indices closed at new record highs and extended their string of record highs this year, about approaching almost 50 highs amid general optimisms about the economic growth outlook and steady flow of the funds from domestic investors. Let us shift our attention to merger deals, market movers, and earnings updates from leading companies last week. Bank of America was in focus after Warren Buffett-controlled Berkshire Hathaway continued to reduce its holding. KB Home declined after the home builder reported weaker than expected results in its latest quarter. AAR Corp, the aviation service provider, reported better than expected quarterly results. Snowflake, the cloud data management company, announced its plan to raise $2 billion through a convertible bond offering. SAP, the German software company, confirmed that company is being investigated by the U.S. Department of Justice for alleged price-fixing practices. BASF, the German chemical company, announced its plan to lower its fiscal year 2024 dividend and return as much as 12 billion euros to shareholders over the next 4 years. Costco Wholesale reported weaker than expected quarterly results. Montclair jumped nearly 9% after LVMH agreed to acquire a 1.6% stake in the company indirectly through an investment in a holding company controlled by the chief executive officer Remo Ruffini. Luxury goods market and fashion designers in Paris, London, Milan, and New York soared over 10% following a raft of monetary stimulus measures announced by the People's Bank of China. H&M dropped 5% after the Swedish apparel retailer reported weaker than expected fiscal quarter results. Rightmove fell after the online property platform's board unanimously rejected the revised takeover offer from Australia's REA Group and said the offer materially undervalues the company. Scout24, Germany's largest online property platform operator, announced its plan to commence its stock buyback program worth 150 million euros. In the week ahead, investors are looking forward to the release of September labor reports in the U.S. Private corporations are expected to report better than 142,000 jobs added in August, and jobless rate is expected to hold around 4.2%. In addition, factory orders, JOLT reports, and update on manufacturing and service activities are also on tap in the week ahead. In Europe, investors are hoping cooler inflation in Germany and Italy and are also awaiting the release of Spain's current account balance, jobless rate, and tourist arrivals. In Asia, investors are awaiting the release of retail sales, industrial production, and jobless rate data in Japan, and manufacturing and service activities surveys in China. India is set to release its infrastructure output, bank loan growth, and foreign exchange reserves in the week ahead. You can review daily U.S. and global financial market news, stock movers, earnings releases, SEC filings, and economic updates on ticker.com and 123jump.com. You can find the latest financial books on Rodera.com and keep up financial industry events on eventsinamerica.com. Review ETF and mutual fund performance and in-depth profiles on tickerfunds.com, and review market updates and stock movers in India on niveshak.in. That is all for today, and we will see you